I never imagined that the person who would hurt me the most would be the one I trusted with everything. One signature, one promise, one moment of blind faith. That was all it took for my life, my home, and my sense of security to start slipping through my fingers. I left my inheritance behind, believing I was giving my son a chance to succeed. Instead, I became invisible in my own story. By the time I realized what was happening, my name was being used, my house was being taken, and my voice no longer mattered. This is how I learned the cost of loving without limits. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 62 years old. For 7 years, I have lived alone in the wooden house my husband built with his own hands near the shores of Lake Michigan in Traverse City. He used to say that if you built something yourself, it would always remember you. When he passed away from a heart condition, the house became my quiet companion, holding every memory we had ever made. Some mornings, I still expected to hear his footsteps in the hallway or his voice humming in the kitchen. Instead, there was only silence. Before I retired, I worked as an accountant for more than 3 decades. Numbers were always honest to me. They never pretended, never hid. You added them up, and they told you the truth. That mindset followed me into every part of my life. I paid my bills early. I kept careful records. I wrote down expenses in a small notebook beside my bed. I believed responsibility was the greatest form of love you could give your family. My days followed a simple rhythm. I woke up before sunrise, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat on the back porch watching the lake shift colors as the light changed. Some mornings it looked silver, other days deep blue. After breakfast, I walked along the wooden dock, checked the mailbox, and tended to the small garden beside the house. In the afternoons, I read newspapers or sorted old photographs. In the evenings, I cooked for one and washed the dishes slowly, as if time itself had become something fragile. The house was filled with reminders of my husband. His fishing rod still leaned against the wall in the garage. His old jacket hung behind the door. The workbench in the shed still carried his tools, arranged just the way he liked them. I never moved anything. I told myself it was respect, but sometimes I wondered if it was fear of admitting he was truly gone. Ethan was my only son. After my husband died, he became the center of my world. I worked extra hours when he was young, saved every dollar I could, and made sure he never felt the weight of our struggles. When he graduated and built his own life, I felt proud in a quiet, private way. He called me often, sent pictures of my grandson, and reminded me that I was still needed. I trusted him completely. To me, he was proof that I had done something right. The property, the land by the lake, my retirement fund, and my husband's life insurance were never things I thought about as wealth. I saw them as security. They were a cushion for the future, something that would one day protect my family. I always assumed everything would eventually belong to Ethan. That felt natural, almost automatic. I never imagined anyone would fight over it. At that stage of my life, I believed my responsibilities were finished. I had raised my child, supported my husband, and managed our household with care. All I wanted now was peace. I wanted quiet mornings, honest conversations, and uncomplicated days. Family, in my mind, was the safest place in the world. Looking back, there were signs I ignored. Ethan sometimes rushed our phone calls. He avoided talking about finances. He brushed off my questions with quick reassurance. I told myself he was busy. I told myself I was overthinking. I did not realize I was slowly convincing myself not to see what was coming. At the time, I felt secure. I felt protected. I believed my life was settled. I had no idea that this sense of safety was only temporary, and that the next chapter of my life would begin with a single signature. If you are still watching and starting to feel the quiet weight of this story, please comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. What comes next will slowly change everything she believed about her family. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. After years of living alone, I began to think that maybe it was time for something new. The house by the lake was beautiful, but it also held too many quiet corners filled with memories I could not escape. Some evenings, I would sit in the living room and feel the weight of the past pressing gently against my chest. I told myself that wanting a change did not mean I was running away. It only meant I was ready to breathe differently. Around that time, Ethan started calling more often. His voice was warm and attentive, the way it had been when he was younger. He asked about my health, my routines, whether I was sleeping well. Then, little by little, he began mentioning paperwork and long-term planning. He talked about taxes, investments, and how complicated things became as people grew older. He said he only wanted to make life easier for me. I did not understand most of the terms he used. He spoke quickly, confidently, as if everything had already been carefully calculated. Each time I asked a question, he laughed gently and said it was nothing to worry about. He reminded me that he had experience in real estate and finance. He told me I should not stress myself over things that younger people could handle. Rachel often joined these conversations. She sounded cheerful and concerned at the same time. She asked whether I was eating well and if I was feeling lonely. She suggested that I deserved a break after working so hard for so many years. Sometimes she said I should think about traveling, about seeing the world while I still had the energy. Her words felt kind, thoughtful, and sincere. A few weeks later, Ethan arranged a meeting with our family lawyer. The office was small and smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. The shelves were crowded with folders, and the clock on the wall ticked loudly, as if reminding us that time was limited. The lawyer explained everything quickly, using long sentences filled with unfamiliar legal language. He said it was a temporary financial power arrangement, nothing permanent, just a way for Ethan to manage things more efficiently. The document in front of me was several pages long. It was filled with phrases I had never seen before: power of attorney, asset management, discretionary authority. I tried to read it carefully, but the words blurred together. Ethan sat beside me, nodding reassuringly. Rachel gave me a small, encouraging smile. They both told me it was only for convenience. I hesitated for a moment. A small voice inside me whispered that I should take the papers home and read them slowly. But another voice was louder. It reminded me that this was my son. It reminded me that I had trusted him with my life since the day he was born. I did not want to seem suspicious. I did not want to become the difficult mother who questioned everything. When I asked for a copy, Ethan said he would email it to me later. The lawyer added that everything was already on file. They both sounded calm and certain. I picked up the pen. My hand felt strangely heavy as I signed my name. With that simple movement, I believed I was helping my family. Not long after, Ethan suggested that I consider moving to Valencia, Spain. He talked about the mild weather, the community of retirees, and the relaxed lifestyle. He even helped me look at apartments and flights. It felt like another sign of his care. Before leaving, I packed my belongings slowly, touching old photographs and letters as I placed them in boxes. I looked around the house one last time and felt peaceful. I believed everything was in good hands. I did not realize that my trust had just become my greatest mistake. If you are still watching and beginning to sense that something is not right, please comment number 2 below to let me know you are paying attention. The next chapter reveals the first sign that her trust may have been misplaced. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. Living in Valencia felt like learning how to breathe again, but in a language my body did not yet understand. My apartment was small and bright, with white walls and narrow windows that let in the afternoon sun. From my balcony, I could see neighbors hanging laundry and hear distant music drifting from cafes. Everything was beautiful in a quiet, unfamiliar way. Still, every night when I turned off the lights, my thoughts returned to Michigan and the house by the lake. I tried to build new routines. In the mornings, I walked to the local market and practiced simple Spanish with the vendors. I bought oranges, bread, and olive oil, pretending I was more confident than I felt. Twice a week, I attended language classes for older foreigners. Most of us were learning not just words, but how to start over. I smiled, nodded, and listened to stories that reminded me how lonely reinvention could be. Despite my efforts, I checked the security camera at home every day. It had become a habit, like brushing my teeth. Seeing the porch, the driveway, and the old maple tree made me feel connected. It reassured me that my past was still waiting for me somewhere across the ocean. One morning, I noticed a car I did not recognize parked in front of the house. It was dark blue and unfamiliar. At first, I assumed it belonged to a neighbor. Then the camera captured Rachel's parents stepping out, carrying suitcases and cardboard boxes. My heart tightened as I watched them walk up the steps and unlock the door with confidence. Over the next few days, the footage changed. Curtains were replaced. A new rug appeared in the living room. Furniture shifted positions. I saw them carrying framed photographs that I did not recognize. The dining table where my husband and I had shared decades of meals was now covered with unfamiliar decorations. It felt as if someone were slowly rewriting my life without asking permission. Soon, even smaller details began to disappear. The picture of Ethan as a child that once hung near the staircase was gone. My name vanished from the mailbox. A new plaque appeared near the gate, displaying their family name. I stared at the screen, feeling like a guest in a place that had once been my sanctuary. I finally called Ethan. I tried to keep my voice calm as if I were asking about the weather. I asked him why his in-laws were staying in my house. He answered quickly, saying it was only temporary. He claimed they were helping with maintenance and watching over the property. His tone was light, almost dismissive, as if my concern were unnecessary. When I pressed gently, he grew impatient. He said I was worrying too much and reminded me that I had trusted him to manage things. The conversation ended with polite words, but something cold lingered beneath them. I hung up feeling smaller than I had before. Doubt settled into my chest. I wondered if I was being unreasonable. Maybe this was what families did. Maybe I was too attached to things that no longer mattered. Still, a quiet sadness followed me through my days. I felt as if I were slowly being erased from my own story. Messages in our family group became rare. Decisions were made without my knowledge. Plans unfolded without my input. I was no longer consulted. I was simply informed when they remembered. One evening, I began saving screenshots from the camera. I labeled them with dates and times. I stored old messages and emails in a private folder. I told myself it was only for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew I was preparing for something I did not yet understand. As I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over Valencia, I realized that distance had not brought freedom. It had brought clarity, and what I saw was unsettling. My place in my own family was quietly disappearing. If you are still watching and feeling the pain of being pushed out of your own life, Please comment number 3 below to show your support. What she discovers next will shock her even more than losing her home. Now, let's move on to Chapter 4. After the changes at my house became impossible to ignore, I began checking my email with a quiet sense of dread. Every morning, before I even made coffee, I opened my laptop and scanned my inbox as if I were searching for something dangerous hiding between ordinary messages. Most days, there was nothing unusual. Newsletters, receipts, reminders. Still, I felt as though I were waiting for a storm I could not yet see. One afternoon, a message from an American bank appeared on my screen. The subject line mentioned account verification and loan documentation. At first, I assumed it was a mistake or a marketing email sent to the wrong address. I almost deleted it without opening it. Something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. When I read the message carefully, my breath caught. It referred to a loan totaling $520,000. The borrower's name was mine. The document listed me as the primary guarantor, responsible for repayment if anything went wrong. My hands began to tremble as I scrolled through the attached file. I had never applied for that loan. No one had spoken to me about it. No one had asked for my permission. Yet there it was, presented as an established fact. The repayment schedule, the interest rate, the property used as collateral. Everything was neatly organized, as if I had willingly agreed to it. I downloaded the file and opened it again, this time more slowly. On the last page, I saw my electronic signature. It looked exactly like the one I had used years earlier when helping Ethan refinance a small mortgage. The shape, the curve, the spacing, it was identical. They had taken an old authorization and reused it without my consent. I checked the metadata of the document, something I remembered from my accounting days. The creation date had been altered, sections had been modified. It was not an original file, it was a reconstruction, a carefully edited lie. As I continued reading, another detail surfaced. My husband's life insurance policy had been listed as additional security. The policy I had kept untouched for years, believing it was a safety net for emergencies, had been placed at risk without my knowledge. That realization cut deeper than the loan itself. It meant they were willing to gamble with the last thing my husband had left me. That night, I searched Rachel's name online. I had never felt the need to investigate her before. Now, I found old profiles and employment records. She had once worked for a regional credit agency. She understood financial systems. She knew how applications were processed. She knew where loopholes existed. What I had first assumed was recklessness now looked like strategy. The truth settled in slowly. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan that required patience, access, and technical knowledge, and I had provided all three. Surprisingly, I did not cry. I felt hollow at first, then strangely clear. Anger followed, but it did not explode. It sharpened. It focused my thoughts. I created a folder on my computer and named it Records. Into it, I placed every email, every document, every screenshot. I printed copies and stored them in a locked drawer. I wrote dates, times, and short notes in a notebook. I treated my own life like an audit. I began reading about financial rights, about power of attorney limitations, about fraud, learned vocabulary I had once ignored. I learned how silence could be dangerous. For the first time, I understood that trusting blindly was no longer an option. Whatever came next, I would not face it unprepared. If you are still watching and realizing how serious the situation has become, please comment number 4 below to let me know you are still here. The next chapter contains a moment that will completely change her perspective. Now, let's move on to chapter 5. By the time Ethan called that night, I had already learned how to live in a state of quiet alertness. Every sound in my apartment felt louder than it should have been. Every notification made my heart tighten for a brief second. I no longer checked my phone with casual curiosity. I checked it with caution, as if each message might carry another hidden wound. It was past midnight in Valencia when the screen lit up with his name. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. Part of me was tired of pretending that everything was normal. Another part of me knew that avoiding him would not give me answers. I took a slow breath and answered. His voice was thick and uneven. Music pulsed in the background, and laughter spilled through the speaker in waves. It sounded like he was surrounded by people, by noise, by celebration. He was not calling from a quiet living room or a thoughtful place. He was calling from a world where consequences felt far away. He talked quickly, jumping from one topic to another. He mentioned a new vehicle he had purchased, describing its features with propriety. He spoke about upcoming projects and potential deals. He praised his in-laws for their support and connections. Everything he said carried the tone of someone who believed he was finally winning at life. I listened without interrupting. My free hand rested on the table, gripping the edge so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. I focused on keeping my breathing steady. I did not want him to hear the storm forming inside me. Then, without hesitation, he laughed and said, "You signed it, Mom, so it is basically mine now." The words landed softly, yet they shattered something fundamental inside me. He did not sound cruel. He did not sound angry. He sounded casual, almost careless, as if he were stating a simple fact. That was what made it unbearable. I did not respond immediately. Silence stretched between us, filled only by distant music and his uneven breathing. I could tell he had not even noticed what he had said. To him, it was obvious, natural, accepted. My fingers moved almost automatically. I opened the recording application on my phone and activated it. The decision was not dramatic. It was practical. I understood in that moment that memory alone was no longer enough. I needed proof. He continued talking, unaware. He spoke about how complicated things were, how much pressure he was under, how everyone expected him to succeed. He framed himself as someone carrying heavy responsibility. Not once did he mention me as a person. I was reduced to paperwork, to authorization, to permission already given. Inside, emotions collided. Shock came first, sharp and paralyzing. Then grief followed, heavier than anything I had felt since my husband's death. This was not just about money. It was about realizing that my trust had been converted into leverage. I thought about the nights I had stayed awake balancing budgets, the weekends I had skipped vacations to save for his education, the years I had placed his needs before my own without hesitation. None of that seemed to exist in his version of reality. Outwardly, I remained calm. I responded with short, neutral sounds. I did not argue. I did not demand explanations. I knew that confrontation in that moment would only give him time to adjust his story later. When the call finally ended, the apartment felt unusually silent. I sat in the dark, holding my phone, listening to the echo of his words in my mind. There was no confusion left, no room for denial. That night, I stopped hoping that this was all a misunderstanding. I stopped waiting for him to correct himself. I accepted that something between us had fundamentally changed. The next step was no longer emotional. It was legal. After the call with Ethan, sleep became difficult. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with memories and questions that refused to settle. I lay awake listening to the faint sounds of the street below my apartment, replaying his careless words again and again. Each time they felt heavier. Each time they confirmed what I no longer wanted to deny. Whatever bond we had once shared had been buried beneath paperwork and ambition. For several days, I avoided making any major decisions. I walked through Valencia, sat in small cafes, and pretended I was simply another retired woman enjoying life abroad. In reality, my mind was working constantly. I knew I could not rely on the family lawyer anymore. That trust had been broken. If I wanted clarity, I needed someone who had no connection to my son. I searched for legal assistance in English-speaking networks and eventually found a small international law office near the old city center. That was where I met Lucia Hernandez. She was calm, direct, and professional. Her office was modest, with neatly organized files and large windows that let in natural light. She did not rush me. She listened while I explained everything from the beginning, including details I had never shared with anyone before. When I finished, she asked me to send her every document I possessed: emails, contracts, screenshots, loan records, insurance papers. I spent 2 days organizing everything and delivering it to her. Watching her read through those pages felt strange. It was like seeing my private life translated into legal language. Lucia worked carefully. She compared dates, examined clauses, and cross-referenced attachments. She explained terms that had once confused me. She showed me how certain phrases limited authority rather than transferring ownership. Slowly, a picture began to form. One afternoon, she looked up from her desk and said that I had not signed away my property. The power of attorney only allowed management, not possession. More importantly, it included a revocation clause. I still had the right to cancel it within 60 days. My hands tightened around my chair as she spoke. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Then she continued. She showed me a separate file that had recently appeared in public records. It was a preliminary agreement involving my lakeside land. The potential buyer was a company connected to Rachel's family. The structure was complicated, but the intention was clear. They were preparing to sell my property quietly before I could intervene. Hearing that felt like being struck twice in the same wound. This was no longer about convenience or miscommunication. It was systematic, calculated. They were trying to move my assets beyond my reach. I left her office that day, shaken. On my walk home, I thought about Ethan as a child, holding my hand on his first day of school. I thought about birthdays, holidays, and late-night talks when he was struggling. I thought about my grandson and the possibility that legal battles might push us apart forever. For a moment, I considered doing nothing. Silence would be easier. Forgiveness would be simpler. But it would also mean surrender. I returned to Lucia's office the next morning and told her I wanted to proceed. We prepared the revocation documents. I signed a new authorization granting her limited legal representation. Every signature felt different this time. I read every line. That evening, I booked a flight to Michigan. I did not tell Ethan. I did not warn anyone. This was no longer a family conversation. It was a matter of protecting what was mine. As I packed my suitcase, I realized I was leaving Valencia not as a confused mother, but as someone ready to confront the truth. If you are still watching and feeling the tension rise, please comment number 6 below to show that you are following every step of this journey. What happens next will take her back to the place where everything began. Now, let's move on to Chapter 7. The flight from Spain to Michigan felt longer than any journey I had ever taken. I barely slept, staring at the small screen in front of me, while memories and worries blended into one restless stream. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized that I was no longer traveling as a mother coming home to visit her family. I was returning as someone preparing for confrontation, even if no one knew it yet. When I landed, I did not call Ethan. I did not send messages. I booked a small motel under my maiden name and kept my arrival quiet. The room was plain, with thin curtains and furniture that had seen better days. It smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old carpet. It was nothing like my house by the lake, and that was exactly why I chose it. I needed distance, even while standing close to everything I once owned. For 2 days, I stayed inside, watching the weather change through the window and gathering my courage. On the third day, I drove slowly through my old neighborhood. I parked down the street and observed from a distance. I saw unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Rachel's parents came and went freely, carrying groceries, laughing on the porch. They moved with the comfort of people who believed they belonged there. In the evenings, I noted their routines. When lights turned off, when doors locked, when the house became quiet. I felt like a stranger studying a place that once knew every step I took. One afternoon, when the driveway was empty, I decided it was time. I still had my spare key. I had never thought to return it. Holding it in my hand now felt surreal, like touching a piece of another life. I walked to the side entrance, listened carefully, and unlocked the door. The smell inside was unfamiliar. Expensive candles and artificial flowers had replaced the scent of wood and lake air. The furniture had changed. New couches, new curtains, new paintings on the walls. My photographs were gone. Even the small table where I used to place my mail had been moved. I walked slowly, controlling my breathing. Every step echoed in my chest. The master bedroom door was locked, but the study remained accessible. Inside, the desk had been replaced, yet the filing cabinet was still there. I opened drawer after drawer, old folders, recent invoices, envelopes stamped with bank logos. Then I found what I was looking for: printed contracts, loan drafts, handwritten notes. Some documents were partially filled, waiting for signatures. Others were already marked. I took out my phone and photographed everything. No flash, no sound. I copied files from the computer onto my USB drive, moving carefully through folders labeled with neutral names. One audio file caught my attention. It contained a conversation discussing my status on paper. I stopped listening halfway through. I had heard enough. What hurt most was not the paperwork. It was the absence of me. My books were gone. My clothes had been donated. My place in the house had been erased as if I had never existed. Still, I did not cry. I refused to let emotion weaken my focus. I left the house exactly as I had found it. I locked the door behind me and walked away without looking back. Back at the motel, I reviewed the files in silence. Everything was clearer now. This was no longer suspicion. It was proof. Back in my motel room, I spread everything across the narrow desk and bed like pieces of a puzzle. Printed contracts, photographed documents, copied files, handwritten notes. The small lamp on the nightstand cast a yellow glow over the papers, making shadows that shifted whenever I moved. Outside, cars passed occasionally, but inside, time seemed suspended. I worked through the night, driven by a focus I had never known before. I began by sorting the documents into clear categories: loans in one pile, insurance records in another, property agreements in a third. I labeled digital folders carefully, adding dates and short explanations to each file name. Every detail mattered. One missing document could weaken everything. Years of accounting had trained me for this kind of precision, and now that discipline became my shield. As I reviewed the loan paperwork more closely, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Buried in one of the agreements was a familiar name: my grandson's. He had been listed as a secondary guarantor through a trust arrangement I barely recognized. He was only 6 years old, yet his identity had been used to strengthen their application. My hands froze over the keyboard. I stared at the screen for several minutes, unable to process what I was seeing. Using my name was betrayal. Using my child's child was unforgivable. They had crossed a line that could never be erased. If the loan defaulted, his financial future could be damaged before it even began. Anger surged through me. sharper than anything I had felt before. It was no longer about me protecting myself. It was about protecting him. With renewed determination, I began contacting everyone who could help. I wrote to a property lawyer in Michigan, attaching scanned deeds and contracts. I sent a detailed report to the State Financial Investigation Office. I contacted the bank's fraud department and included evidence of signature misuse. I forwarded everything to Lucia in Spain, asking her to coordinate from her side. I kept my messages short and factual. No emotional language, no accusations, only documentation and clear questions. I knew credibility mattered more than outrage. The next morning, my phone started ringing. First, an investigator asked for clarification about dates and signatures. Then a bank representative confirmed that several transactions were being reviewed. Later, a legal assistant informed me that irregularities had been flagged. Each call felt unreal, as if my private pain had suddenly become public record. By afternoon, I received confirmation that multiple accounts connected to my property had been temporarily frozen. Transfers were halted. Pending sales were suspended. The machinery of oversight had begun moving. For the first time since leaving Valencia, I felt a shift in balance. The power was no longer entirely in their hands. They were being questioned. They were being watched. Yet there was no sense of victory, only exhaustion and quiet sadness. I thought about family dinners, holiday laughter, and bedtime stories I used to read to my grandson. I wondered how things had drifted so far from that simple warmth. That evening, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, looking at the neatly organized folders on my laptop. I had gone from trusting without question to documenting everything, from silence to action, from fear to clarity. I knew what would come next. They would call, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. If you are still watching and wondering how this story will finally end, please comment number 8 below to let me know you are ready for the truth. The final chapters will reveal the consequences of every choice that was made. Now, let's move on to the conclusion. The days after the accounts were frozen passed slowly, as if time itself had decided to hesitate. I remained in the motel, keeping my suitcase packed, unsure whether I would stay another night or leave at dawn. Every sound from my phone made me look up, expecting a message or a call. I knew it would come. I just did not know when. On the third evening, as I sat by the window watching headlights slide across the parking lot, my phone began to ring. It rang once, stopped, then rang again. Ethan's name filled the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Another part understood that avoiding him would only delay the inevitable. When I picked up, his voice came through rushed and strained. He sounded nothing like the confident man who had once boasted about his success. His words tumbled over each other, broken by sharp breaths. He told me that the bank had locked several accounts. He said pending deals had collapsed. He said his employer was asking questions he could not easily answer. I listened quietly. I did not interrupt. I let him speak until his sentences lost structure and turned into fragments of panic. He admitted that investigators had contacted him. He said lawyers were involved. He said people were distancing themselves. Even his in-laws, who had once encouraged his ambition, were suddenly careful with their words. The safety net he thought he had built was unraveling. Then he began to explain himself. He said he had only wanted to improve our family's future. He blamed rising expectations, competitive markets, and constant pressure. He said Rachel's parents had pushed him toward certain decisions. He insisted he never meant to hurt me. He repeated that he was overwhelmed and confused. His voice softened as he spoke. It carried traces of the boy I had once comforted after scraped knees and failed exams. For a brief moment, my heart tightened. But memory returned quickly. The forged signatures, the secret loans, the erased photographs, the recorded words that had revealed his true assumptions. When he paused, waiting for my response, I spoke calmly. "Did you ever think about me?" The question was simple. It did not contain accusation or anger. It contained truth. Silence followed. I could hear him breathing, searching for an answer that would not condemn him. None came. After several seconds, he began to speak again, but his voice lacked confidence. He offered apologies that sounded rehearsed. He promised change. He hinted that my cooperation could ease the investigation. I understood what he was asking without him saying it directly. He wanted me to intervene, to soften consequences, to restore his safety. I told him I would not. I said that I would not contact the bank on his behalf. I would not withdraw reports. I would not minimize facts. What had happened needed to be addressed honestly. My words were steady, but they cost me more than he could know. He protested weakly. He reminded me that he was my son. He spoke of my grandson. He implied that my choice would affect the entire family. I closed my eyes and listened until he finished. Then I told him that protecting him by hiding the truth had already harmed us enough. I ended the call gently. Afterward, I sat in silence for a long time. There was sadness, there was grief, but there was also relief. I had chosen integrity over illusion, and there was no turning back. After the call with Ethan, I stayed in Michigan only long enough to finish what needed to be done. The investigations continued quietly, handled by professionals who cared more about documents than family history. Within months, the fraudulent agreements were invalidated. The unauthorized loans were placed under formal review. My name was removed from liabilities I had never agreed to carry. For the first time in a long while, my finances belonged fully to me again. Before leaving, I returned to the house by the lake one last time. The rooms were emptier now. Most of the unfamiliar furniture had been removed, and the walls looked strangely bare. I walked slowly from room to room, touching door frames and windowsills as if saying goodbye to an old friend. Memories rose gently rather than painfully. I realized that keeping the house no longer meant keeping my husband close. His presence lived in me, not in timber and walls. I decided to sell the property. Letting go was not easy, but it felt honest. I was releasing myself from a place that had become a battlefield. The sale provided stability and closure, something I had been missing for years. With part of the proceeds, I established an education fund for my grandson. I worked directly with a financial advisor to ensure it could not be misused. The account was structured so that only he would benefit when he reached adulthood. It was my way of protecting his future without entangling myself in his parents' decisions. Soon after, I returned to Valencia. This time, I did not feel like a visitor or an escapee. I rented a modest apartment near the river and furnished it simply. I planted herbs on the windowsill and learned the names of my neighbors. I belonged to my own life again. I began volunteering at a community center that offered financial literacy classes for older immigrants. Many of them had stories similar to mine: lost savings, misplaced trust, confusing paperwork. I taught them how to read contracts, how to ask questions, how to protect themselves. Each class reminded me that experience, even painful experience, could become something useful. One afternoon, I received an email from my grandson. The message was short. He wrote that he missed me and hoped I was happy. I read it several times, feeling both warmth and sorrow. I did not reply immediately. I wanted to answer from a place of clarity, not emotion. In quiet moments, I reflected on my own mistakes. I had confused love with surrender. I had believed that being a good mother meant stepping back completely. Now, I understood that healthy love included boundaries, honesty, and self-respect. I learned that kindness without awareness could become vulnerability, that silence could enable harm, that forgiveness did not require forgetting. Most mornings, I now sit on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. Sunlight reflects off tiled rooftops. Voices drift upward from the street. Life continues in small, steady rhythms. I am no longer defined by what I lost. I am defined by what I chose to protect, and finally, by what I chose to become. Sometimes, life teaches its hardest lessons when trust is broken and silence becomes too heavy to carry. Through loss, disappointment, and painful truth, we learn that dignity is not something given to us by others. It is something we must protect ourselves. Real strength is not found in anger or revenge, but in clarity, courage, and the willingness to choose honesty over comfort. Every ending is also a beginning. Every wound, if faced with wisdom, can become a source of growth. When we learn to respect our own boundaries, we discover that peace does not come from pleasing everyone, but from standing firmly in our values. In the end, what matters most is not what was taken away, but what we chose to rebuild within ourselves. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe to support the channel and stay connected for more meaningful stories.